in engineering and not in engineering interested in observability. And that is a success criteria that I always have. Because, okay, yeah, I know. The pillars, the dashboards, the SLOs, the sleep deprivation, the sad feelings, and the but that's also kind of not super relevant to most of engineering, or at least most of the business. It's a necessary consequence of having a broken system and dealing with it. But it's not great. Right? You don't want that. You just need to get it. So if you don't want that, here's my guide to rolling out observability when you have a shoestring budget and no shoestring. Step one, people mess this one up a lot. If you start with an engineering champion, if you go, I need to convince the engineering leaders in my organization that we need this observability thing, that we need to invest in it, you're not really going to necessarily get to the right place. Because in order to do any initiative in engineering, you already have to be able to convince them. It's like saying, oh, in order to wake up in time to go to school in the morning, I gotta wake up in time. Like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're either gonna do it or you're not. Don't worry about that. I mean, worry a little bit. But first, can you take a non-engineering person whose budget you're gonna have to share if you get this thing done? Can you convince them that what you need together is this observability thing? Because it's one company, it's one budget. And we all talk about, we have the engineering budget, and we have the marketing budget, and we have to find, where'd that come from? One giant pot, and everybody splits it up equitably, fairly. Only a couple tiers involved, usually, sometimes. Sometimes some fights, sometimes a little bit of lack of sleep. But generally, people are actually pretty nice about it. As long as you can get everybody to understand each other. And one of the things that's difficult about running a business, particularly a tech one, is marketing has spent decades learning how to understand sales and business and go to market and every aspect and every function of the business, it turns out, has spent decades, if not centuries, learning how to understand each other. And then engineering walks up, and they're like, you can't measure us. You can't understand us. We're unintelligible. Kafka clusters. Anyway, we're going to need 20% of the budget. 20% increase in the budget year over year to upgrade React. And our Kubernetes is falling over. Have you heard of observability? We're going to need to just add Azure. What? People that haven't spent any time whatsoever understanding how to tell other people how they contribute to the business. Engineering is in kind of a weak spot on that. So here's your practice. You're saying, this thing of how to understand engineering. We're buying a thing to help us understand what engineering is doing. We're going to make that understandable to the business. Well, if you can't do it here, it's not going to work when you roll it out. So my favorite people to tend to look at are the people with a lot of budget, and they're really good at teaching the rest of the company why their budget is useful. Have you ever noticed that? Marketing can break it down super well. Sales can break it down super well. Security can break it down super well. We might argue about the theater, we might argue about whether or not it's used, but they can break it down. So if you can explain the value of observability to them, if you can get them to say, let's share the budget together and build you this thing that we need. If you can do that, you have a lot more success. Like, that is, the reason this is first is because it's the 80% of the result of 20% of the effort. It's going to feel like 80% of the work, but you're saving so much work for just talking to people and making sure they can understand what you're doing. Step 2. I like to think in rooms of 3. I like to think in terms of 3. It helps me remember things. 1, 3, 5 is a nice, cute little whatever. If this is the implementation part, this is are my systems workable enough to even become observable? The goal is to figure out how to go from whatever you got with 1 command install, 3-ish of your various stats in a company. You can't just start with the hello world. You need 3 different in order to show that you can generalize. And it should only take you 5 minutes to go from 0 to something. If you can't do it in 5 minutes, once you figure out how to do it, if you can't do it in 5 minutes, from scratch, with 1 command on 3 different stacks, it's going to be really hard to do this. But you're not looking for the complicated stuff, right? You're not looking for all the advanced, sophisticated integration. You're just, can you get anything? If you can't instrument, if you can't get observable, hello world, or is this thing on? Okay, are these lights on? Yeah, how long did it take you to figure that out? Like 2 seconds. Are my servers on? How long did it take me to figure that out? 4 days? 20 command line utilities? No, that's not going to work, right? You can't get it done in 5 minutes. Once you figure out how to do it, you might say, but Hazel, nothing in the industry, literally nothing, lets us accomplish this. Let's pretend for a moment that this is not a sorry indictment of the state of the industry. It is, but let's pretend for a moment. It turns out perception is a lot more important than reality, particularly here in the rolling out phase and the proving out phase. You're still building the argument. Now remember, we haven't really gone to the true value of observability yet. The true value comes not just from are the lights on, but being able to build up from that. So perception matters a lot. Okay, so let's try the 135 thing again. Let's try it again. Remember, nobody has time. Nobody's got energy. You're underwater. You can't do it in 5 minutes. Well, if you can't do it in what feels like 5 minutes, if you get someone nerd excited on it, maybe they spend an hour, but it feels like 5 minutes, that counts. Maybe it's not 1-step command. Maybe it's a 1-step opt-in. What if you silently figure out some integration stuff, silently work on some things, and you build a persuasive argument? You build, hey, I'm going to sit you down with me. Boom. You hit this flag. You hit this thing. I already turned this on for you. All you need to do is hit the please do this for me button. Amazing. Cool. That's something. All right, so we don't need, and then we have these 3 advocates there. What's that? So maybe it's not 3 different stats. Maybe it's not 3 different parts of the code base. What if it's 3 different people in different parts of the engineering side? Can you convince 3 different viewpoints, 3 different perspectives on how the system works? Which is kind of the same thing as 3 different stacks, but it's perception. I'm proving socially what I can prove via tech. Like if I build the implementation via tech, that's one thing. But if I convince 3 different people who work in different parts of the code base that this is going to work, I have, in essence, done the same thing. Right? Either way, I'm going to find out soon enough if it's possible. But at least this gets us to step 1.5, or to step half. Maybe not even step 1, but it gets us rolling. Because it turns out that like a lot of companies, so many companies, are like, this bleeding edge thing you're talking about, this wide data. You have data? What? I don't even have APIs. I'm sitting out here rolling all this stuff with duct tape. I'm like looking at my Ethernet cables and figuring out which end is upside down. Like, y'all are living in the future. I'm living in the Stone Age. Most companies feel like they're living in the Stone Age. Most companies have systems where they genuinely do not know how many computers they own. They genuinely do not even know how many web servers are sitting up, which sockets are exposed, if anything's on. Does the server return a 404? Man, I don't even know if the server returns. I just sent it out into the wilderness and it came back with an Australian accent. I don't know where it came from. That's what you got. So you really, and I mean really, have to start from zero. I'm not talking about hello world, open telemetry. I'm not talking about how, you got to start from zero. More zero than that. You got to go even more zero than that. You got to go, I'm not even talking about hello, like hello console.log. No, less zero than that. Keep going, keep going. Can I just ping it? Okay, that's something. Can I? Anything. If you have zero information, a single bit, a single one or zero, in the right place is more information than what you started from. So start there. I can't tell you how many times people have spent 3 weeks, or multiple weeks, multiple days, tens of thousands of engineering time and effort trying to build out this observability integration, and then they come to me and they're like, hey, so I'm kind of confused, this is really hard. And I'm like, can you poke it? Can you just boop? And they're like, I don't know, I've never tried. I'm like, what are you doing with 50,000 lines of YAML then? What? You haven't even tried it yet. You haven't even poked it. You haven't even kicked it to see if it's moving. You gotta start from so small it feels trivial. Like literally command line utility, ping it, ping the IP address. Can you do that? Cool, that's something. That's your time. Once you've done that, usually you'll find that you have a huge amount of existing, calling it observability might be a strong word, but a huge amount of existing something. Sucking up a lot of resources, sucking up a lot of time, sucking up a lot of faith and trust, and brain space, and your ability to understand the system. So sometimes you just kind of need to light it on a fire. Throw it probably when you do it. But you say, Hazel, I can't seriously do that. What do you want? We depend on these systems. Do you know how many people won't be able to install their emoji packs if we go down for more than like 10 seconds? This is critical infrastructure. Okay. But really, seriously, if you can show and figure out the ROI or anything about your system as it exists, what you're really trying to do here is you're trying to take the sunk cost fallacy of what you have existing and get people used to the idea of taking that step back and going, here's what we're spending. From scratch, let me justify the value of that. Turns out, you probably can't. And also, a lot of this infrastructure, especially some of modern stuff, if you have all your observability, you have all your telemetry-ish kind of stuff going on, sucking up a bunch of money and everything, how many times have people looked at it? Ever? How many times has it ever been useful in an incident? If you really sit there and you look at it, actually, you know what? You can just try it. You can just turn it off. Worst that happens is you roll back your code base and you roll back your deployment, or you clone the server. You can even, if it's spinning disk, you can unblock the server. You can take the hard drives, you can image it, copy the ones and zeros. It's possible to try something out and undo it. I have yet to see a system you can effectively undo, including the really, really complicated ones where you definitely shouldn't undo it. You can usually still figure out a way to see what value it's actually giving you. Because again, if observability is about understanding your system, you should be able to understand the value of the understanding of your system. You should be able to know the cost of the thing that is helping you understand the cost. But if it can't understand itself, how is it supposed to help you understand the rest of it? Yeah? So, funny story. I once had a huge amount of logging turned on at a previous company in AWS. They had logging, they had retention, they had all the features of everything turned on, the extra fancy everything. And I said, what are we doing with this? This is like 30% of our bill. And they said, oh, we need this for like compliance reasons. And I said, do we? They said, oh no, we need this for understanding the system. I'm like, do we? They said, yeah, everything will fall over if we don't have it. And I'm like, do we? You sure? This system would send out a severely one incident if you had even a single non-200 response in the back end. It was burning out all the engineers due to weird, spurious, broken updates everywhere. People were waking up at 3 a.m. to, oh, some random 404 happened on an existing URL. Oh, I'm going to go back to sleep. No. Stupid. And then, the moment I was waiting for happened. We got an email from customer support saying, hey, this customer emailed us. The system's down. Everything's in the back end. In this one area, the system is broken. And I turned to our engineering leaders and I said, oh, you mean the one with the really expensive the monitoring thing? That one? The one that has not yet alerted us? The one that has not yet paged us? The one that has not yet notified us in any way that the system isn't working? That's the one that the customers are emailing us about? That one? We lit that shit on fire. I walked up to the engineering leaders and I said, you have two options. We sit down, we spend the time required to take this alerting, to take everything that we think it can do, and make it able to do it. That's going to take probably about 2 months. You're going to have to stop a lot of feature work. You're going to have to stop a lot of development. It's going to cost probably 20 headcount over like a month or two. Because what we think it can do and what it can actually do are this different. And if you want it to have the capabilities you think it does, it has to be here. Or, it turns out we have an extremely effective alerting system in the form of email, where you can just use that, in which case I'll turn off the entire alerting and monitoring system. Because that's what we're already doing. That's how it's already working. And they chose that option. And so we turned it off. We saved a bunch of money, and we got to put that money into making the system more reliable. In fact, I didn't even need to do anything. The system became more reliable because the engineers was not so sleep deprived anymore. The engineers were able to focus on actually solving the problem. They were able to write better code. They didn't have to worry about weird nonsense. It started fixing itself once you had to take a critical look at what it's doing and how it's doing it and how accurate it's actually doing. You can't just buy a capability without actually figuring out if it's doing a thing. Here's another story. Different company. Don't worry, different company. Names changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. I'm the guilty. We had the most modern and beautiful Observability 2.0 tooling. The most beautiful and elegant system. We had all of the stabilization you could ever want. It was glorious and horrifically broken. It was in fact so broken that we had this enterprise contract for about $50,000 a year, seems about right, except that the enterprise contract, it turns out we were blowing our usage of it so badly that we would have to renew the next year for another $300,000 a year. More than we were already paying. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot of usage. So I did a couple things. The first thing was, are we sampling anything whatsoever? Turns out no. So I tried that. Cool. We dropped an order of magnitude, and the 2% in the system where the sampling worked. The other 98% of the volume was the broken system. Completely broken. The sampling didn't work. The tracing didn't work. Everything else didn't work. You had 2-week-long span to the whole bunch of things, just like dropping everywhere, missing data, corrupted data. And I'm like, the system's supposed to work, right? Like, what's going on? And so after about a month and a half of digging through the entire source code, digging through and understanding everything that's going on, it turns out there was a single line in the YAML file dictating the buckets of where the sampling came from. And that, due to an implementation quirk in how the collector worked, was defining the unique ID as the concatenation of the ID of every single span in a trace, which meant that if the span deviated in any way from any other span that looked like it, you had a different unique ID. So of course they were all different. The sampling didn't work. I tried cranking the sampling up to 1 in 50,000 and it still didn't work. So finally I changed one line of YAML. One single line of YAML. We went from over 330 million events per day to 2.5 million per day. Like that. We went from, we need to spend $350,000 a year on this thing, to, we fit in the free tier. We need the enterprise one for, like data contracts. But we fit in the free tier now. I'm like, cool. The other thing that was interesting, although I didn't necessarily bring it up due to political reasons, was if you looked at the usage of this observability system, it was used on average about 200 times per month. You're spending $350,000 a year for something that's used 200 times a month, of which me debugging why the hell it was broken was 80 of those times. Of which, of all the remaining 120, 130 times a month, was 80% of that was for engineers in a 250 to 300 engineer company. So you're spending like $5,000 per engineer per query or something? You get that much value out of your system or no? Pretty sure I've never seen anybody get that much value out of a single query, unless it's maybe like a Google-sized query and they know exactly what they're doing and they know why they're doing it. But usually that's a bad idea. So if you want one single trick, the fastest way to get any observability vendor to hate you, track how many queries you're actually running per person per month. If you want to get even spicier, you can track how much that is, per your budget, right? Per how much you're actually spending. It's very funny. But okay, so you get past that, and then you go, okay, now that I'm trying to think about rolling this thing out, now that I'm trying to do the thing, you're going to have to go with what implementation do you want? What tooling do you want? What tech choices? The things engineers love to nerd out about. They're like, oh yes, I have opinions on tooling. And I'm like, have you ever used it before? They're like, I have opinions, I saw it on Reddit. It's fine. It's fine. They will die on hills they've never seen. It's fine. Whatever. Give them what they want. Don't give them what they need. Here's the thing. You have a social contract with your engineers, with the rest of your company. The social contract is, we're figuring out how to teach the engineering organization how to understand the system. You're building a system. How do you think you need to understand it? And you can spend your political capital, you can spend your trust with the engineers in one of two ways. You can say, screw you, you're wrong, I know better than you. You're going to do it this way, you're going to like it. And I'm going to spend all my time and energy convincing you that I'm not an asshole. Or, you can give them what they want. And you can say, hey, you know what? I trust you. Sure, I have an expertise in this and you don't, but that's fine, I trust you. How do we together understand if this is the best choice for you? How do we together understand if you're getting the value you need out of this, if the rest of the company is getting the value you need out of this? How do we together work on this problem? I have suggestions if you want to hear them. I have problems. I've done some of this before. I'm sure you have too. I'm not, but I'm sure you have too. It's fine. Don't spend your energy telling them they're wrong and then asking them to trust you. Spend your energy getting them to trust you and then working with them to influence them. It's so much easier to have them go, I think I know what I'm doing, and then have them fall off a cliff, and then just pick them up and like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. Set them back down and go, hey, buddy, you want to try the path right over there? They're like, oh, that's a great idea. Whoop. Cool. You can do that. If you ruin your trust, if you spend your trust to ruin your trust, you're hurting yourself twice over. And you're going to make every interaction you ever have with them for the entire rest of your duration of the company that much harder. Do you really want to do that? It hurts. I know, it hurts to watch them go, I have opinions and I'm accurate and I'm correct and I know better than you. And I'm like, it hurts, right? You understand. But that's not really what they're saying. They're saying, I'm comfortable in this. They're saying, I kind of understand this. They're saying, I'm starting from here. This is a different domain, but I had a story about this that changed the way I thought about this. This was back in my front-end engineering days, and we had to do a content management system creation thing. And the long story short of it was we were spending so much time designing how the website looks that we weren't able to figure out how the website worked. And so I said, we need to fix this with a component library. But this was before useful ones existed. Bootstrap was kind of the option. Or you could do a weird-ass custom thing. But because everything was so dynamic, you needed to do the weird-ass custom thing. But I had one engineer in particular who said, no, I really, really think we should do the bootstrap thing. He wasn't saying that. Those are the words coming out of his mouth. What he was saying, or what I interpreted him to be saying, was, look, I come from a Drupal background. I did the PHP thing. That's what he was saying. That's what I heard. And I come into work every day and I feel stupid. I come into work every day and I work on a stack that I don't understand. And I work with tooling that's fighting itself. And I work with this and I work with that and I can't understand the documentation because it doesn't exist. And you're telling me that instead of using the thing that I know that solves a problem similar to this, instead of using you wanting to go and build your own thing, you think you're smarter than the entire rest of the industry? You're going to make me even stupider. You're going to make me feel even stupider. What are you doing? And so that was the answer that I addressed. And I said, look, I will be with you every single step of the way. We have technical limitations that mean that this feels like the best path. We really do need to try this. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you a month. If you're not begging me to keep it in a month, I'll undo it. I'm going to work with you every single step of the way. I'm going to write the documentation. If you have any questions, I will drop everything. I will work with you. I will trust you. I will trust that you trust me. In about 2 weeks after I had built that system and deployed and released it, he comes into work. He's like smiling a little. I haven't really seen him smile during stand-up in a while. And he says, Hazel, I get it. I understand why you built that. I was doing this thing, right? And he starts describing the problem he has spent all day on. All day trying to get this thing to work, trying to build it. And it's, 4:45 p.m. He's almost ready to go out and he goes, oh shit. I've only tested it horizontally, I haven't tested it vertically. Oh man. And he's like thinking to himself, I'm gonna have to rip this out, I'm gonna have to rebuild it, I just wasted a day. So he just But he built it using my design system, my component library. So he just pops it vertical. And it worked without any changes. And for the first time, in the entire time we worked at that company, he felt like he knew what he was doing, and he was beaming from ear to ear. And said, Hazel, I get it. I get it now. I get why you did this. It works. You can do that. But you gotta start with what they need. But by what I mean by what they need, you gotta start with what they're saying, with what they want. You have to meet those emotional needs. You have to get to them standing here saying, hey, I have this system and I don't understand and I can't see and I can't look at it and I don't know what's going on because I don't have any of that yet. But I do know kind of how to find my way around in the system if I use some of these tools I'm familiar with. Work with that. The worst thing you can do when you're trying to understand a system is to tell the other people that are with you on that journey that you don't trust them to understand something, that you don't trust them to think. What do you think they do? They think for a living. You gotta work with them. Give them what they want. Trust them and work with them. And then what they need will be discovered together. And who knows, you might be a little bit wrong. Sometimes you are. That's cool too. So you have observability. You have something. What's the difference between observability 1.0, like the basis, the standards? What's the difference between that and observability 2.0? What's the difference between that understanding what you think you have versus false clarity? Here's something that's interesting about observability. When you get really, really good at understanding the system, sometimes part of the system doesn't want you to understand it. Because after all, the system is not just tech, it's not just computers, it's also people. There are parts in the system that resist understanding itself. If you're going to go on a journey of deeply understanding every aspect of a system, you have to be prepared for at some point, the system is going to fight against understanding itself. And when you encounter that, you're going to run into this. Sometimes companies are not ready for the next generation of understanding the system, because in order to do so requires developing the ability to challenge assumptions that are too politically contentious to challenge. Like, for example, I worked at a company where it was very, very product-led growth, very, very product-driven development. Very much you build the roadmap, you design it in your head as a product manager, and the engineers implement it. We started implementing, more advanced observability, and at some point, I got to realizing that at no point did we have the ability to segment any of our stuff by the product roadmap and show what was being used and what was not being used. And I'm like, oh, can I build that? Do you want it? The head of product said, yeah, I want that. Every product manager was like, what? Are you kidding me? You mean I have to verify that the stuff that I'm designing is useful for the company? That gets in the way of my promotion. They didn't say that. But it was deeply embedded. It was so resistant. They were like, there's no way I can put that on the roadmap. There's no way I can allocate even a sliver of time to getting better at product management. Because it wasn't about being better at product management. It wasn't about being better at understanding the system. It was, if you take something where their existence at a company, where their understanding of their own success, their understanding of their own place in the company hinges on them not understanding some part of the system. If you insist on understanding that part of the system, you're going to challenge their very identity. And that is going to get really, really rough. Because it turns out, observability is far more about culture than it is about what data storage you have, what query engine you have. It the technical capabilities are cool, but you can't really use them unless you can use them, unless the culture is there, unless the people are wanting to go and look at them and understand them. If I say, hey, your promotion depends on you having a certain amount of views and a certain amount of things here, a certain amount, do you develop the ability to do that? Or do you get really, really good at convincing everybody that you actually had it and you don't have to back it up with hard numbers? That one is way easier to get promoted with. Not having to back it up with hard data? Oh, hell yeah. I can chat GPT a really convincing argument all day long. Hard data means I have to actually do something that the market wants. That's way harder. But if my promotion depends on, right? So you can work around this. Right? There are ways to, but you have to understand the culture. There are ways to say, okay, so page views per certain types of segments mean that compromises something over here. That's cool. If you aggregate that data in a certain type of way, you don't get page views necessarily. You go, okay, what's the next type of question that I want? I want availability SLOs. That's not legible as page views per service or per product endpoint. But I get this reliability, uptime SLO metrics that are useful for engineering. And I can hide a certain part of understanding away from the system until the culture is ready to change. You can do that, you can work with it. Or you can run straight into the problem, trip over it, and never get to the point where the system is useful enough to start answering some of those meaningful questions that the company needs. So it's sometimes weird. You have to sort of almost do this like psychology thing. You have to talk to people sometimes. You have to understand what the motivations are in order to actually understand how they want to understand the system. It's almost like the system is part people and part computers, like socio-technical? Huh. There's also one of the hard parts that you run into with observability is you run into this cliff of ROI. Remember the previous story that I had about how you had 200 page views per month for the whole company, of which 80 were me. The rest were basically split among 4 engineers. That power law distribution pretty much always exists. And the power law distribution is not even inherent in systems, it's inherent in communities. You have a community of, say, maybe 100 people living in a neighborhood. How many of those people clean up sidewalk litter? How many of those people throw a block party? How many of those people pay attention to what anybody else on the street's doing? If you have 100 people, maybe 10 are going to do it. Of those 10, maybe 1 or 2 are going to actually go and do something about it. But for understanding the system, for understanding things, for taking care of this socio-technical system that is your infrastructure, your company, your ability to navigate, you're going to have this power law distribution. Of it, about 10% of your company headcount is going to be infrastructure people. Of those infrastructure people, about 10% of them are going to actually give a shit about observability. Of those, about 10% are going to go out of their way to get good at it, rather than just learning the first 5 queries and calling it a day. That power law distribution will bite you, especially if you're not paying attention to how your budget is allocated in view of that. Maybe it's fine, maybe it's okay to spend 20% of your budget on one person and their ability to query something 40 times a day. But you should know you're going to be making that argument to some executives at some point, when they're going to look at the usage metrics and they're going to say, we're spending $200,000 a month so that this one person can make query, and you're like, you should prepare for that. You should understand that that is the consequence and that's the reaction of it. So the power law distribution needs to be factored in to how you think about your budget. Are you spending all of it on data ingestion and none of it on data querying? What's the point of that? Are you spending all of it on data querying and none of it on ingestion? Like, the power law distribution up there needs to needs to correlate with what's actually going to happen in the system. So if you're thinking about this observability 2.0 thing, culturally, there's a pivot point. The pivot point is when you stop designing your system or designing your observability around just shoving this stuff in there, and you start going, I have this data, and I want to correlate it with this other type of data so that I can figure out the relationship. Because after all, systems are defined by the relationships of the components, not so much about the components itself. When you understand that, things like sampling start making way more sense. Who cares what this one specific request was? I want to know the shape of things that look like that request. I want to know the relationship of users that look like this in the system. I want to know the relationships in the system and what those relationships do to each other and how they influence each other. If this part of the system gets really hot, does this part of the system get really cold? That's useful. That means I can allocate these resources over here. I can make them do this, and that's fine. That's not going to blow up the system. If this gets hot and this gets hot, can't do that. There needs to be a different set of autoscaling. Correlation. When you start thinking in terms of data correlation, that is a cultural pivot. Because you, as the engineers, as these infrastructure people are going, you're starting to think in the system in terms of the shape and the flow, which is really cool. The second one is those who build query. They don't have to be, you don't actually have to have those who build it, run it, ship it, and query it. Those can all be different people. But at some point, when you build software in this type of culture, in this type of environment, you're going to go, I have a question about that. Maybe you're not on call for it. Maybe that's a different department. Maybe you don't even build it. Maybe you don't even release it. Maybe those are all different things. You can have waterfall-style development. Totally fine. But at some point, the person who's building it, culturally, is going to go, I wonder. And when that happens, they should be able to answer it. When that starts occurring, don't block off access to the data. Like, come on. That is a thing in a lot of regulated companies. It's a perennial annoyance of mine. The people that they try to lock the data away or try to obfuscate the data or control the data, and you prevent this cultural emergence from happening. If the data is important, if the data is protected, it's fine, but you need to figure out how to take the data and redact it in a certain way that's still useful for people querying it. The querying needs to happen for those who are engaging with the system. Those who are building and implementing it need to start asking what they're doing in it. If I poke the system, it's going to poke me back, and I want to know what happens when it does that. And until that happens culturally, until that desire is there, you're not really in that observability 2.0 world. But after 2.0 comes 3.0, right? Okay, so 3.0. What's the difference with that? You can think technically, as I wrote in my blog post, something data lakehouse. Cool, whatever. Yeah, just like observability 2.0 can quote unquote technically be defined as wide events in an OLAP like columnar data storage. You kind of think of observability 3.0 as a lakehouse architecture. That's the least interesting thing about it, and you can implement observability 3.0 thinking and culture with Bash, curl, and SQLite. So, sue me. However, you are going to have a cultural pivot point, which is something really interesting happens here. When you're understanding the system, and the system is built of people, and the system is built of technology, and specifically, you start building a system in engineering that represents an understanding and an ability to understand all of the system. It is going to at some point start to reach outside of engineering. It is going to start ingesting information and correlation and understanding the causations and relationships that extend beyond just the servers. And at that point, they're going to notice that the system becomes deeply, deeply valuable to people who do not have the word engineer in their title. You don't necessarily have to force it, but look for it. Because when that happens, you don't want to waste it. I had a company one time where you had these marketing people who wanted this information, and they were not allowed to get it because the roadmap for engineering just was not there. And so I tried to get the roadmap for engineering there because they want it. They should be able to understand how the engineering things work and vice versa. And then they ran to like the product team who couldn't put it on the roadmap. And the product team couldn't put it on the roadmap because the engineering team couldn't understand that it was valuable for anybody else. And so you ran into this problem of the values there, people want it, but they wanted to silo into this tiny little thing because they didn't understand that when you have a rich ecosystem of information, the more that information is used, the more it's seen, the more it's ingested, the more it's processed by everybody in it, the more it itself becomes valuable. Which means, at some point, the next biggest, in my opinion, cultural pivot is the delineation, the differentiation between what we call observability and what we call business intelligence starts to become kind of sort of arbitrary. You can think of it almost more as front ends or as interfaces of querying the same communal understanding of the system. What is business intelligence if not Power BI in front of all the same stuff that you want to know about when you're doing engineering? And really, it's amazing. Did you know that there's this thing called error budgets? So you can have an error budget and you can go, I could take this really expensive database and I could spend 6 weeks doing a live migration of this database, burning out all my engineers and keeping my 5 nines of uptime. Or it turns out that of all of our customers, this one customer has a 9-figure contract and they need the database up 24/7 except every 3rd Tuesday of the month. It's a thing. Their stuff goes down for 4 hours every 3rd Tuesday of the month. Cool. How do you know that? If you knew that, you could save weeks of effort. You could save millions of dollars of your own effort by just going, we're just going to bring this thing down for 1 hour because we have our error budget. It's within our agreements, it's within our SLAs, it's within everything else. But I need to understand a very, very deep interconnected network of things. I need to know the sales people, I need to know the customer success people, I need to know the account managers, I need to know the reliability team, I need to know the capabilities of the database team, and I need to, if all these people get together in the same room and they have the same brain and do a brain melt and just go, maybe you get that working. Or you build a system in which the business intelligence of it might go, oh hey, the usage of the system in terms of per dollar of income just drops like a rock on this day every month. And you might go, oh, that's weird. And you can just see that. You can just see that in the graph. But there's not a single observability system and implementation that I know of today that can query that type of data. Because nobody's ever bothered enough to actually stick those 2 pieces of data together and join them, despite the fact that it's right there. It's right there. And you can even do it in a privacy-preserving way. You totally can. Opaque GUIs, opaque UIDs, totally, you can do it. Just nobody has. Which means, one of the other interesting things is this is sort of more forward-facing. But what is company strategy? What is company strategy? How do you know if your company strategy is working? The company strategy, take a bunch of people in a room. You have them sit down and you go, okay, here are the priorities. Here's this kind of Pareto principle thing of, we have all these boxes, we have all these lines, okay, this isn't important, but that's important. And How do you determine that company strategy? What's the data that you're using to make this? You can have a bunch of people that just have all the data in their head, that's cool. But what if you could represent all that data? What if you could, and there's always going to be some gut instinct. You need the gut instinct, it's part of being human. But at some point, you can actually take a lot of the company strategy, you can represent it. And something really, really cool happens when you represent it. If you put room in the system for the human gap, you can say, we can represent a certain amount of this. We can represent a certain whatever, and this percentage is the gut instinct. And you can start to represent that too. Really, really interesting stuff happens. You can start doing like futures trading on yourself. You can start doing speculative guessing on how your results are going to go as you do X, Y, and Z. You can start to think, so we want to get here. We want to achieve this result. And if we achieve this result, we're going to have these business outcomes. And we're going to know we're on the right path if we have all of these sort of metrics kind of pointing in the right place. And it's a combination of business intelligence and market intelligence and sales research and all these other things, the system performance itself. And we're going to make this leveraged bet in our infrastructure. We're going to make this leveraged bet in our tech debt, eliminate, and whatever. And you combine all that together. How important is it that all those bets are right? It's not that important, actually. That's what the human gap comes from. We can go, this seems a bit off. But it's not that we're in the wrong direction, it's just that we guessed, a percentage. Like that's fine. But being able to look at that, you can see where everything's going. It means that someone else can come in and they can go, and this looks weird from my perspective. It can start to bring a really, really deep conversation in very, very rapidly. It's super cool. And I hope in the next 10 years, people start to experiment with what this might look like. What does it look like in a company to take holistically your understanding of the problem domain, of the solution domain, of how you think about the future and the possible futures? How do you represent that understanding in a way that combines what you know, what you speculate, what you guess, what you believe, and ties it together with your observability, business intelligence, all of these things, into a picture that everybody is collaboratively working on together and developing a process to ask meaningful questions, get useful answers, and then act effectively on what they learn. Any questions? We have 40 seconds left. Well, thank you very much.